Hey, I'm Warren Sprouse. This is the Bible Forum. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. We'd love for you to join us. We talk about life. We talk about the Bible. We try to put them both together. We have a governor here in South Carolina that we are very proud of. She has left us for another. She is now the UN representative for the United States. We are very proud that she's there. We wish she was here. Her name is Nikki Haley. She went to the UN this week to present her credentials. She announced, "You're going to see a change in the way we do business. Our goal with the administration is to show value at the UN, and the way we'll show value is to show our strength, show our voice, have the backs of our allies, and make sure our allies have our back as well. For those who don't have our back," she added, "we're taking names. We will make points to respond to that accordingly." She went on to say, "Everything that's working, we're going to make better. Everything that's not working, we're going to try to fix. And anything that seems to be obsolete and not necessary, we're going to do away with it." The United Nations is the United Nations, the United States is the United Nations' largest single financial donor. We provide 22% of the UN's regular budget. And that according to the terms of an international agreement that sets a country's contribution based on its wealth. That assessed contribution pays for operating expenses like electricity bills at its headquarters and human rights investigations in places like Syria and South Sudan. The United States also contributes voluntarily to other United Nations programs, including those that provide food and blankets to refugees fleeing war zones and that immunize children against preventable diseases. A draft executive order obtained by the New York Times this week proposes at least a 40% cut to those voluntary funds. Some of the provisions in the draft text are redundant, and it is unclear how serious those proposals really are or if they will ever be signed. Current and former officials said Friday that the Trump administration was delaying its plan to issue such an order. Since the 1950s, there has been one organization that has advocated for getting the U.S. out of the UN. Do you know what it is? Haven't heard much about it in the last few decades, but if you were around in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, you heard about the John Birch Society. In its day, it was largely the focus of ridicule because it was fighting UN memberships. You drove around the United States and you were likely to see a barn or an outbuilding along the highway with a sign, "Get us out of the UN, John Birch Society." And in those days, there were people who scoffed. What is this? Well, it's probably an ultra-right wing something or other. Don't pay them any mind. They're out of sync. Well, John Birch was a fundamentalist Baptist missionary who answered the call of duty in World War II, fought in the Pacific. John Birch was killed 10 days after the armistice was signed. He was killed by the Chinese communists, not by the Japanese. His story, his records, were then sealed by the U.S. government. Only after a decade of investigation and interviews by his parents and a speech by California Congressman William Nolan did the government unseal the record and reveal the truth. When a group of patriots wanted to start a national conversation about government secrets and un-American activities, John's parents gave them permission to use his name, and the John Birch Society was born. We don't today understand so much about government secrets and un-American activities, but during the 1950s, that was a big discussion. They had a committee on un-American activities, and it went crazy. And so did the signs. Signs went up everywhere. Get us out of the UN. Even then, people could see where all of this was taking us. An international organization poised to dominate individual nations for their own purpose. In the days when this was coming together, a statement like that was labeled crazy, radical. But now we have 70 years of hindsight. So you tell me. Now the Trump administration is reportedly preparing executive orders that would decrease the role of the U.S. in the United States as well as other international organizations, and to do it initially by 40%. The New York Times reported Wednesday the first order, dubbed, quote, auditing and reducing U.S. funding of international organization, end of quote, would cut funding for any UN agency or other international groups that meet any specific criteria. The Times reported that the criteria includes any organizations that give full membership to the Palestinian Authority, or any related groups, programs that fund abortions, and any program that goes around Iran or North Korea sanctions. The order would also halt funding for any group that is connected to state-sponsored terrorism or has links to human rights violations. Additionally, the order would reportedly establish a committee to see where the funding cuts could be made, specifically zeroing in on the peacekeeping groups, the International Criminal Court, aid provided to countries that oppose UN policies, and the UN Population Fund. Alabama Representative Mike Rogers told Fox Business this week, quote, the United Nations has proven to be an ineffective and wasteful bureaucracy. Rogers put together a bill earlier this month that would end the U.S. membership in the UN altogether. We put this money in, 22% of their total budget, and we get what? UN exists to bring about a global society. What people don't understand, perhaps, is that if this global society ever comes into being, it will be the United Nations who's in charge. They already have a global parliament, a global bank, a global court, they have global trade agreements and policies, global laws, global health policies and organizations, global police, a global army of sorts, and more. What they don't have is the US of A. At least not yet. And until they do, nothing they do will be effective nor lasting. Think Brexit. The EU is crumbling around their shoulders. The US of A exists precisely to stop things like Brexit and the United Nations. Think the American Revolution. Somebody somewhere across an ocean telling us what we can and cannot do, trying to run our lives as if they think they could do it better than those that are here. Our policies and practices as a nation are completely anti-global, and they are that way deliberately. There's a reason. And in the process, we have demonstrated consistently our superiority. We're not smarter than everybody else. We're not luckier than everybody else. But we are largely wealthier than everybody else. We have greater technologies. And the people around the world don't want to hear that. And the progressives here think, that was terrible. I got one word. It's actually two words put together. Netflix. Have you not seen these British or European movies and situation comedies or dramas or whatever that are set in the 1970s and 80s some of them into the 90s. And they are living in homes with plumbing and electrical work and cars and all the rest of it that we had in the 50s. In fact, some of the electrical systems I've seen, we had outlawed in the 40s. They still have them. They don't live like we do. There's a reason. They want us to become like them. Get us out of the UN.